and rescue for. Save them, O God, from every trouble, distress, and calamity, and bestow blessings and success upon their efforts. Help them to subdue our enemies, and grant them, O God, salvation and the crown of victory. May they depart in peace and return home alive and safe. Our Father in heaven, grant peace to the land and eternal joy to all its inhabitants. Fulfill for us soon in our days the verse of Scripture. Every family shall sit under its own vine and fig tree, with no one to disturb them, for it is the Lord of hosts who speaks. May it be your will, and let us say amen. I was going to say something and I forgot. Before we start, because I'm going to forget, can I just say a couple of things, please? I would like to remind everybody that our gift shop will be open on November the 26th, which is a Sunday, from 1 to 5, and proceeds will be going to please upcoming programs, because they're always listed, and find something that we think they're interesting, the program. So hopefully you will. Have I forgotten anything to mention? Or shall I stop talking now? I think I'll stop talking, and I will hand this over to introduce our very, very special speaker for the evening.
Hi, welcome, Rabbi Margie. Rabbi Margie is a dynamic second career rabbi. After retiring from a 30-year career as a high school mathematics teacher, she began her rabbinic studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. She received her ordination in 2019, along with an MA degree in Bible. She is currently the rabbi of the Jewish Center of the Mauritius. Am I pronouncing it right?
Mauritius.
in Center Mauritius, New York. She is currently an educator for the Women's League of Conservative Judaism. Weekly, we in Women's League are privileged to be the recipients on Makom B'Yahad of her learning. She teaches and inspires us. Coincidentally, she's going to tell you anyways, but today, November 14th, is the launch of her first book, Hindsight is 2020, Torah Lessons from a Turbulent Time. And I believe most of these were written for Makom, if I'm correct on that. Tonight, she will share her story of her journey to Judaism. I'm very honored to introduce Rabbi Margie Cella.
Thank you, Doreen, and thank you for inviting me to come and speak tonight. I just have a question. As most of you I don't know, but there are several of you that I do know. Is there anyone here who has heard me tell my story before? Oh, Ruth. Okay.
I have.
And Doreen. Okay.
I've heard your story.
Who was that?
And Marion.
Oh, Marion. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I promise you this, it will not be boring. It is a unique story, to be sure. So just to give you some perspective on where I am, I live in Port Jefferson Station on Long Island in New York. And that is a town which is on the north shore of Long Island, about 55 miles east of New York City. If you were to look at a map of Long Island, you know, it looks like a giant fish. We are about halfway out on the North Shore. That's where I live right now. I grew up a little bit further west from here. I grew up in a town called Massapequa on Long Island. Massapequa's claim to fame has been, up until this point, two famous actors, comedians. One is Alec Baldwin, and the other is Jerry Seinfeld. You may know those names. I never met either one of those people, but that's the town I grew up in. So so just to give you a little bit of background, I was born in Queens, New York. But when I was 3 weeks old, a mere 3 weeks old, my parents moved from Queens out to the suburbs, out to Massapequa, for a town that was suddenly booming. Some of you may have heard of the town called Levittown, which in post-war years was a booming town because so many veterans were taking advantage of the GI Bill and buying homes out on Long Island, and a very much a reduced cost for veterans. Levittown had filled up, so the next town east from there was Massapequa, or in our case, specifically, North Massapequa. That's with the town that my parents moved to when I was 3 weeks old. I had 2 older sisters at that time, and I was supposed to be the last attempt at having a boy, and having disappointed them with that, I was raised with a lot of the expectations of a boy. I was the one that got the Lionel trains and the Tinker toys and all those things. And of course, even though I was supposed to be the last attempt at a boy, 6 years later, I had a baby brother came along, and 5.5 years after him, another baby brother came along. So I am truly the classic middle child, 2 older sisters, 2 younger brothers. So maybe that explains a lot. I don't know. But so I was raised in this small town in Nassau County on Long Island. So my parents were a church-going family. My father's background, his family was Protestant, specifically Lutheran, though my father was not particularly religious. My mother was raised Roman Catholic, and in those days, people were much more strict about these things. Someone who was Catholic was not permitted to marry someone who was divorced. The rules are a little bit more lenient these days, I understand, but my father, having been in the service during World War II, had been briefly married, very quickly realized it was a mistake, and after several months, the marriage was dissolved, but because it was dissolved by divorce, that meant that when he met my mother, she could not marry him according to the Catholic Church. So one day they basically eloped, went to the minister's study, the Lutheran minister's study, with her best friend and his best friend as witnesses, and were married. And she left a note for her father saying, "Dear Daddy, the Catholic Church won't marry us, so we're going to someplace else that will." So, so my mother, because they were married in Lutheran church, my mother converted to Lutheranism, and with all the zeal of a convert, devoted herself to the church. And because she was so devoted, my father became devoted as well. And we were a church-going family. A lot of our lives revolved around the church. We went every Sunday morning. I went to Sunday school. My parents went to services. I was also, when I was very young, I was in the youth choir. When I got older and people realized I really couldn't sing, I was not involved in the choir anymore. But church was a very, very, very big part of our lives. And for me, as I grew older and I really started to understand things, or understand what I was being taught anyway, I started to question things. And as I got into junior high and we were being taught the basic, it was confirmation classes, we were being taught the basic doctrine of the church. Some of the things that I was being taught, I had questions on. I'm a logical person, and some of the basic tenets of Christianity, I had a problem with. For example, the idea that Jesus is half man and half God never really made sense to me logically. Also, in Christianity, they talk about a Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, but tell you that that is one God. And now I'm a math person. So to me, I would say Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That sounds like three to me. And no matter how it was explained to me, it didn't make sense to me. And these are some of the fundamental beliefs of the church. Now, please understand me. I do not criticize or condemn those who are sincere Christians and who hold these beliefs firmly. But for me, they didn't make sense. And so when I was like in 7th and 8th grade and learning these things, I asked questions. And when I asked questions, the answer was, well, we just don't question, we just accept on faith. And that, of course, didn't sit well with me at all. But I mean, what could I do? So I kind of buried my questions, and I went through the confirmation ceremony, basically to please my parents. I wasn't happy about it, but I did it to please my parents. Now think about this. Think of those of you who have children. If your children have been through bar and bat mitzvah, just imagine if your child had come to you at the age of 13 and said, listen, Mom, Dad, I'm not sure I believe in this Judaism thing. I don't want to have a bar mitzvah. I don't want to have a bat mitzvah. What would your reaction have been? Right? So I went through with this confirmation basically to please my parents, but was not feeling all that committed. I really felt like a hypocrite. Now, let me backtrack a little bit. When I was 6 years old, there was a new minister who came to the church. We had a minister in the church. There was a new guy who came. He was supposed to be the assistant minister. And when he first came, he was the assistant minister. And when he came, he was the kind of person who was, I mean, if you looked at him, you never would have believed it, because he did not have a very imposing personality appearance at all. But his personality was such that the young people were attracted to him. And so he spent a lot of time with the teenagers in the congregation, the young people, and he very quickly developed a following amongst the young people. And that gravitated eventually towards the older people as well. And within a short amount of years, he somehow had managed to switch the positions so that even though he was originally the assistant minister, he and the head minister, who was there long before he came, switched positions. He was now the head minister and the other guy was the assistant. And as I got into high school, he started teaching things that were not basic. The church was Lutheran. That was the denomination that we were. He started teaching things that were not basic Lutheran doctrine. What he started teaching was more like when you see some of these Bible thumping guys on TV, the fundamentalist guys, the born again Christians. This is what he was teaching. And so he would teach, you have to accept Jesus to be saved. You have to be born again. And if you don't accept Jesus, you're going to go to hell. But if you do accept Jesus, all your sins will be forgiven, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure you've heard a lot of it. And being the kind of person I was going to church every week to just at that point to please my parents, but I was going and I was listening to this. At the same time, I was a teenager. Now, I was a high school teacher for 30 years. I know that teenagers, high school kids, go through an awful lot in their lives. There is so much pressure on high school students. There is social pressure. There is academic pressure. They have to decide, are they going to go to college? Where are they going to go to college? What are they going to major in? At the same time, it's like, well, who's going to ask me to the prom? And, there's all kinds of things that high school kids are dealing with. It's a lot of pressure. And I was dealing with all of this at the same time. And I had reached a point where, for various reasons, my girlfriends were not always happy with me, not always talking to me. And at the same time, there was a lot of stuff going on with me socially, let's just put it that way. And there was a particular, and I remember one day sitting in math class, because a lot of my friends were getting involved in what was going on down at my church with this born again Christian business. And one day I'm sitting in math class, and my Jewish friend who's sitting next to me says to me, "What's going on down at your church there?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "Well, how can you not know? It's your church." So a lot of the other kids in school who were already involved in this had been talking to her. So she asked me, and I really couldn't give her the answer that she was looking for, because I was trying to avoid it myself at the same time. But at the same time that all of this other stuff was going on in my life, I was now by this point a senior in high school, and there was just a lot of stuff going on. And then there was, on top of everything else, there was this whole issue of the prom. And there was one particular guy I wanted to ask me to the prom, and he kept saying he wanted to ask me, but he didn't, and he was holding back, and I didn't know why. And ultimately, he sends me this note. Now, remember, I'm talking about we're 17 years old. This guy was raised in a Baptist home, was very, very religious. And he sends me this note. He tells me, "I wasn't sure because you hung around with some of the Jewish kids. I thought you might have been Jewish. And if you were, then I can't date you." And talking about how he loved Jesus and I had to accept Jesus. And to me, this was, at that point, the straw that broke the camel's back, because I was hearing it from all sides. And so the very end of my year of high school, in May of my senior year of high school, I had an experience where I became, quote unquote, born again. To me, I mean, looking back on it now, it was largely an emotional experience. In any event, all of a sudden I found I had lots and lots of friends, because everybody that was involved in this group at my church wanted to be my friend. They wanted to pray with me. They wanted to study with me. And they all said to me, you don't have anything to worry about, because Jesus forgives your sins. And everything was wonderful. But now I had to make a decision about where was I going to go to college. And my parents, being very, very protective, did not want me to go away to college. This was 1971 when I graduated from high school. They didn't want me to go away to college because they were afraid I might get involved in who knows what, sex and drugs and rock and roll. I don't know, but that's what they were afraid of. And so I didn't go away to college. I went to a college called Hofstra University, which was about a 15 to 20-minute drive from home, and I became a commuter student. That allowed me to continue to be involved with this group that grew out of my church, led by this minister, whom at this point everybody was calling Pastor Jack. And a lot of my friends were involved as well. And when I started my first year of college, I had met my husband in high school. He and I actually graduated high school together. We didn't like each other when we first met in high school. We met again at Hofstra because we were both math majors. And we started dating. And about 3 weeks into our dating relationship, I said to him, "Listen, I don't want to put too much pressure on you, but if you don't accept Jesus, I can't see you anymore." So of course, my husband was raised Roman Catholic. So now he became involved in this group as well. So now I need to tell you that over the course of time, this group in the New York metropolitan area attracted people from virtually every denomination of Christianity, Roman Catholics, Protestants across the board, every denomination of Protestantism that you can think of. And yes, there were Jews who were attracted to this group as well. And we literally took from the entire, like all of Long Island and the 5 boroughs of New York, we were pulling quite a few people. And at its peak, I think this group probably was about 2,000 people. It was not a Lutheran group, it was something else. So it started out as a born-again Christian group. Over the course of time that we were involved with this group, my husband and I, and we were involved with this group for the next 11 years of our lives. Over that time, this group gradually morphed from a born-again Christian group to what they called being Hebrew Christians, some kind of a cross between Judaism and Christianity. Kind of like the Jews for Jesus. From there, it morphed to something which was semi-Orthodox Judaism with a twist. And ultimately, we realized after many, many years that it was a cult. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But so those 11 years, now, mind you, I'm talking about from the end of my senior year of high school, so from the age of 18 up to the age of 29. Now, a lot of you are the same age as I am, or similar age. Think about all the things that happened in your life between the ages of 18 and 29. For me, those years included graduating high school, starting college, graduating college, along the way, getting engaged to my husband, marrying him, starting my career, and the birth of both of my children all took place during those 11 years I was involved with this group. Major, major, major life changes all took place in the shadow of this group. So let me describe this group to you that we were involved with. It was the social structure of it was that this guy, Pastor Jack, was the leader of the whole group. And eventually we didn't call him Pastor Jack anymore. We called him Abba. Underneath him, and by the way, Abba was not married, never did marry. Underneath him, there were 12 men, handpicked by him, that he called the elders of the group. And everyone who was part of this group was assigned an elder. So no major life decisions could be made without consulting with your elder. So that meant like starting a new job, getting engaged, getting married, whatever. No major life decisions could be made without consulting with your elder. The elder could usually give you an answer. If he could not, then he would go to Abba and then come back to you with an answer. Then beneath the elders, the next most important element was the family element. And because this was a patriarchal group within the family, the husband, the father, was the most important person. He was called the head or the priest of the family, and whatever he said within the family went. So it was very much, it was like this is why I said it was like Orthodox Judaism, but with a twist. So there were certain obligations that we all had to meet if we became part of this group. We had to tithe 10% of not our net salary, our our gross salary. We had to tithe 10%. We had to support the school. There actually was an elementary school, which was accredited by New York State. I'm not quite sure how they managed to do that, but we had an elementary school. And everything was done within the context of this group. So as time went on, it originated out of the church that I grew up in. We also literally took over another Lutheran church about 15 minutes away in a town called East Meadow on Long Island. So these are the two places that we worshiped. And as time went on, it was a gradual change. When I first got involved back in high school, like I said, it was mainly born again Christian, except that at the end of every service on every Sunday night, at the end of the service, all of the people in our group who were born Jewish would go up on the altar with, he was still Pastor Jack at that point, and someone would open up a giant tallis over all of them, and they would pray for Israel. Israel not meaning the country Israel, Israel meaning all of us, all the faces I'm looking at on the screen, the Jewish people, praying for the Jewish people, that we would all come to know Jesus. Now, Jesus, over the course of the time that we were there, first it was Jesus, then it became Yeshua. And Jesus was originally, we talked about him as being the Son of God and the Messiah. That morphed ultimately into being a prophet, not necessarily also God, and eventually morphed in so far that we didn't talk about Jesus so much. And if you had asked 10 different people that were there at that time, you probably could have gotten 10 different answers about what they believed about Jesus. So it was a gradual change over the course of the time that we were there, which makes sense, because had he come in at the very beginning and told hundreds and hundreds of people who were practicing Christians, listen, you're going to be Jewish, we would have all said, what are you, nuts? But it was gradual. It was gradual, a little bit at a time. So let me talk about how that gradual change occurred. When we were still in college, my husband and I, we went on, there was an annual camping retreat at a campground in a place called Kent, Connecticut, for a week in July, the beginning of July. It had originally started as a family camping retreat. Only families could go, but then people who were single in the group wanted to become part of it. And so they made a decision that we could go as well, but girls could only be in a tent with girls, guys could only be in a tent with guys, and we were on two opposite ends of the campground with the families in between us. But we could get together for, we could get together for meals and things like that. So the first time that we went, this is when we were still in college, we went up, a bunch of our friends went up, and we got together on Friday night. And the plan was to have Shabbat dinner, because certain things were already being introduced. And I still remember, here we are at the campground. We lit our Shabbat candles. We did motzi. We did Kiddush. We did motzi. And then we sat down to our meal, and the main course that night was pork chops. So, because certain things, that's why I say it was gradual. It was gradual. I remember in terms of the services, originally we met on Sunday nights. That was moved to Saturday nights. And on Saturday nights, we began, and I didn't realize what it was at first, when this guy, Abba, came out with this blue and white twisted candle that had many wicks. I didn't know what he was doing. It was Havdalah, of course. And then our services ultimately became Saturday morning services. And by this point, we had done away with the Christian prayer book. We used a Siddur. the same siddur, which at that time was used at Shearith Israel in Manhattan, the oldest Sephardic congregation in Manhattan. This was the siddur that we were using. A number of people had learned to read Hebrew. And now let me describe to you what this room looked like. We met in the gym, the basement room of the second church that we had taken over, because it was the biggest room. Had you walked into this room, this is what you would have seen. The chairs were set up in a semicircle. On the left side of the room is where the women sat. On the right side of the room is where the men sat. In the middle of the room was a shulchan, and on the eastern wall was an ark. Okay, so this was set up like a Sephardic synagogue, because in a Sephardic synagogue, you have the shulchan in the middle of the congregation. And in the ark, we actually had a Torah. I'm not sure how we managed to obtain a Torah, but we did. We had a Torah. And so the services were out of the siddur. And there were enough people in the group who had grown up Jewish that there were some people who could do some Torah reading, some people who could do Haftorah. But the highlight of every service was when Abba got up to give his sermon. And the sermons were long, and like people hung on his every word. Now, you can imagine how some of us felt when at some point Abba said to the assembled group that within this group, those who were born Jewish, he was adopting as his family. They were to become a family. So they were, in a sense, an elite group within the group. And initially, the only way what you could be part of that group was to have been born Jewish. Now, in that setting, you can imagine how those of us who were on the outside felt. How did we feel? I want in. I want to be part of that group. That group is important. I want to be part of that. And so eventually, he opened it up. And this group, he called this group, sometimes he called it the community. Sometimes he called it the family. He opened it up to those of us who were not born Jewish. We could apply to become part of this group. You had to fill out an application. You had to be interviewed by 3 of the elders. And there were a lot of questions that they asked. And if you passed that, then you could become part of the community. So about a year or so after my husband and I were married, we put in our application and we became part of the community. Now, as such, every week after service, first of all, like I said before, we were assigned to an elder. The elders would take attendance and who was there and who was not there. The elders kept track of things like who was tithing and who was not tithing and things like that. And every week after service, we would have a family meeting. So those who were not yet part of the family couldn't stay for this family meeting. So what transpired during this family meeting, we would be told things like if anyone had left the group, we would have nothing to do with them. If anyone within the group had done something which was deemed to be harmful or dangerous to the rest of the group, that person had to get up in front of the group and confess what they had done and ask for the others' forgiveness. You can imagine how wonderful that made someone feel. So what I'm describing to you, like I said to you, it was a cult. We didn't see it as such. And our parents tried to tell us, my parents tried to tell us, and my parents by this point had left. They went to another Lutheran church because they basically had been said, and now imagine this, they had been members of the church for 25 years. And one night, the assistant minister on a Christmas Eve got up and gave a sermon to these people and said to them, if you don't want to be Jewish, get out. Imagine in their own church. This is what they were told. So they left. And so they tried to tell us it was a cult. We didn't believe them. My in-laws tried to tell us it was a cult. We didn't believe them. We didn't believe it. We thought we had a mission. We thought we were really special. So as time went on, we were deeper and deeper involved in this. But at this, and so what else was involved? What else was taught to us? The women were taught how to keep a kosher home. The men were taught how to put on talit and tefillin. At some point, there were classes given in the laws of family purity, the laws of nidah. And they actually constructed 2 mikvahs in people's homes. And the women in the group were going once a month to the mikvah because they had been instructed in how to do this. And then just before we left, the next big thing that was being taught to us was modesty and how we should dress. Within this group, young couples were encouraged to have babies, and lots of them, and not practice birth control. And so that was pretty much what was happening. So we were involved in this. So our entire lives revolved around this. So during this time, like I said, our children were born while we were there. I, always having been a voracious reader, loved to study. And I found myself drawn towards anything that was Jewish in nature, reading books of all kinds. And sometimes I would read books and say, I would say to myself, this doesn't quite jive with what we're being taught. And then I would say, well, I guess this person who wrote this book doesn't really know what they're talking about. That was the mindset, you know. And then I enrolled in courses at the local university, Stony Brook University. And I took 4 courses. The first one was in American Jewish fiction. You know, we read people like Philip Roth and, you know, popular American Jewish writers. The second one was in the history of American Judaism. And there we learned the difference between Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox Judaism, something I found very useful much later on. And then I took a course in the history of anti-Semitism. And where did we begin? We began with the books of the New Testament, because that's where it all started. And then I took a course these were all with the same teacher, a course on the Holocaust. And I'll get back to that course in a minute. Now, these classes, I should have asked permission for me to take them, because we were not supposed to have contact with the outside Jewish world unless we checked with our elder. Now, you can understand why. They didn't want us to find out what real Judaism was like. And not only that, the outside Jewish world had their eyes on us, and the synagogues around it wanted no part of us. So, but I was a rebel, I guess. I never asked permission, and I took these courses anyway. And so I started to see things and read things and understand things that, like, maybe what we were learning was not quite right. And I still remember one of the first things I really questioned was, there were a couple of things along the way, but you know, I'll skip over some stuff. My first child was a daughter. My daughter was born in 1978. 3 years later, when my son came along, and I didn't know I was having a boy, because in those days we didn't know, you know, like they do today. But all the couples in this group were having a bris for a baby boy if they had a boy. Now, how is this bris done? There's no moil that would do a bris for any of the people in this group. So there was a young man in the group who was studying to become a physician's assistant, and he had learned the physical procedure for doing a circumcision. So he would come to your house along with a couple of the elders, And he would do the actual circumcision, and they would do the blessings. So I remember towards the end of my pregnancy, one day, I went to ask Abba a question. And I said, I have a question. So how come, if we really are a Jewish community, how come we don't have our own mohels? And he didn't have a good answer to that question. So then I had a second question. If we really are a Jewish community, why won't any of the mohels come and do a circumcision for us? And he didn't have a good answer for that question either. And just basically kind of dismissed me because I was asking him a question he couldn't answer. And I didn't have a lot of time to think about it further because my son decided to be born 5.5 weeks early. And so I had to deal with this issue a whole lot sooner than I had really anticipated. And he was a decent size for being born that early. He was 5'11" at birth. But being that early, he didn't want to eat. And he lost weight dramatically. By the time he was 8 days old, he was down from 5'11" to 4 pounds, 8 ounces. And I was told to go ahead with the circumcision anyway. Now, you know, in Judaism, we don't do that. If a baby's not well enough, we postpone it. I was told to go ahead with it anyway. And when I look back on all the things that I did and how stupid, I say to myself, this was like the most stupid thing I did. And like, I'm putting my child's life in danger. Fortunately, everything was okay. But so, and now when my son was born, that's when I was taking that Holocaust class. Now you have to envision this. In the class, we sat in a semicircle. And on the other side of the semicircle was a couple in their 70s who had lost both of their families to the Holocaust. I sat close to the door with my son, so because he was an infant. I brought him with me, so because he was nursing, and so I could take him out if he needed to nurse. But the presence of an infant in a class on the Holocaust had a profound effect on everyone in that room. Because an infant, you see an infant, and it symbolizes to you the future. And I still remember the first book that the teacher assigned to us to read was Elie Wiesel's Night. And I remember I was up in the middle of the night with one of those, those middle of the night feedings we all can remember. And to keep myself awake while nursing this baby, I decided to do some of the reading for class. And I was reading Night. And if you haven't read it in a long time, go back and read it again. Very early in the book, there is a scene where there is this character called Moshe the Beetle. Most of the other people thought he was crazy. Moshe the Beetle manages to escape from the camps and come back and tell people what he has seen. And of course, people don't believe him. But one of the things that he describes is how the Nazi soldiers would take the babies, rip them from their mother's arms, throw them in the air, shoot them, and then hand the lifeless bodies back to their mothers. And this was what I was reading with this infant in my arms. And so one night, when I read this, I took the book, I put it down, and I looked down at my son, and I said to myself, and I can't tell you where this thought came from. I said to myself, there has got to be a future for the Jewish people, and my son has got to be a part of it. And I didn't know how that was going to happen. I just knew it had to happen. And over the course of the next several months, a number of events happened which precipitated us finally making a break from this group. Abba was revealed to be a fraud in the biggest sense of the word. He claimed he had learned everything he knew from his grandfather. His grandfather had died before he was even born. He claimed that he had this heritage of Judaism that had been handed down for hundreds, thousands of years. He didn't even know how to read Hebrew. and on and on. There were so many things that came out that he was a fraud. But the worst part, and there was also monetary issues. By this point, he was living in this huge house while the rest of us were struggling to make our tithes. But the worst part, and this happens with most cults, there is some kind of sexual impropriety. And what came out was that he had abused teenage boys over the course of a number of years. One of those, he had become his right-hand man. And it turns out it was more than that. And then this young man was the kindergarten teacher in the school. And so this young man was now abusing the kindergarten boys. He would invite them home to Abba's house for Shabbat. And parents thought it was such an honor that their boys were spending Shabbat at Abba's. And unbeknownst to them, their young boys, innocents, were being abused. And, with the threat of, if you tell anyone, God's going to kill your parents or something worse. So when we heard all of this, we left. It was enough. We said, we have to leave. But now what do? Our entire world, everything we had devoted our lives to for 11 years was a lie. And where do we go? We couldn't go back to the church. We were too far removed from the church. And we didn't believe in Christianity. We couldn't go to a synagogue because we weren't Jews, and we knew we weren't Jews, even though we were practicing Judaism. So we took some time. We continued to celebrate at home. We celebrated Shabbat every week on Friday nights. And then on Saturday morning, we would study the Parsha together. And we stayed at home all day. And when sundown came, we did Havdalah together. And after we did that for a while, I said to my husband one day, I said, we could be out doing anything we want. We could be shopping on Saturday. We could be eating anything we want. But what are we doing? We're observing Shabbat and eating kosher food. And I said to him, please let me call the rabbi. And he said, okay. So I knew enough at that point, having from all of my classes, I knew the difference between Reformed, Conservative, and Orthodox. And the only thing that made any sense to me, after everything that we had been through, was Conservative Judaism. Because we had a commitment to observing the mitzvot. That was important. But at the same time, after 11 years of taking this and putting it on a shelf and ignoring it, my brain, I needed to be able to say, no, I can ask questions. I have the right to ask questions. And so Conservative Judaism was the only answer for us. And I consulted the closest conservative synagogue, reached out to the rabbi there. I said I wanted a formal conversion to Judaism for a family of 4. And he said, okay, let's talk. He said, I'm not going to make any instant Jews out of anybody. He agreed to work with us. And he had to clear up a lot of misconceptions that we had. But what I still remember the first night we went there, he handed me the prayer book and he asked me to read Hebrew. And I did. And I handed the book back to him. And he didn't say a word. And I thought, uh-oh, did I do something wrong? And he told me years later, I had only made one mistake. At one point, I read a sin as a shin, a common mistake. And he said to himself, I wish that half of my congregation could read Hebrew as well as she just read that passage. So he worked with us. Over the summer, he left to go to Israel. He was an advisor on a USY trip. When he came back in September, I reached out to him because I just wanted to be able to go to shul on high holidays, and I knew we couldn't do that without tickets. And I had to call 3 or 4 times. And finally he said, okay, why don't you come in and we'll talk? We met with him on a Sunday morning, and he said, I got to admit, I was hoping you weren't going to be here when I came back, but you are. So that tells me something. So he said, let's do this. And he said, let's do this before the high holidays. And I said to him, Rabbi, are you crazy? Rosh Hashanah is Friday night. It was Sunday morning. He said, leave it to me. So he got the moil to come out on Wednesday evening to do the Hatafat Dambrit. Thursday morning, we went to the beach, which is about 15 minutes from our home on the North Shore of Long Island. Used that as our mikveh. All 4 of us went in. And that Thursday night, my husband and I were remarried under the chuppah, which was the talit I had made for my husband, in the synagogue's chapel with my children in attendance. And the following night was Rosh Hashanah. It was, and that year was 1982. So we became members of the congregation. We became active members of the congregation. The congregation accepted us with open arms, even though, you know, I told my story publicly. They welcomed us. They made us part of the congregation. And so I had my adult bat mitzvah in 1984. And I was with a group of women. And I spoke about the Parsha Chayei Sarah. I spoke about that last night at Geraldine's talk about the verse, you know, God had blessed Abraham with all things, and whether or not that meant that Abraham was blessed with a daughter. In 1988, I was a woman well ahead of her time. I was teaching Hebrew school, and the boys, I was teaching 7th graders. The boys were required to come with tefillin. The girls were told they could come with tefillin. How many girls do you think came with tefillin? And so one morning, I said to myself, why would they do that if they have no role model? So I went to the rabbi a few days later, and I said to him, I've come to a decision. I'm going to start wearing talit and tefillin. That was in 1988. In 1990, this rabbi, the same rabbi who had done our conversion, left the congregation to go to another congregation. But before he left, he did an installation of our sisterhood board. And he went around the table and had something nice to say to every woman at the table, something personal to every woman who was there. This is 1990. He looked at me and he said to me, Margie, if I had my druthers, you wouldn't be here. With a dramatic pause. And everyone was like, that's terrible. Like, why would he say such a thing? And then he went on and he said, you wouldn't be here because you would be in Manhattan at the Jewish Theological Seminary in the rabbinical school because that's where you belong. And I said to myself, what? Me? I thought he was crazy. But yet he germinated something in me. And over the course of literally the next 25 years, I contemplated applying to rabbinical school. I must have written to JTS 4 or 5 times over the course of those years. And each time I would get the brochure in the mail, and then I would look at it and throw it in the drawer and say, no, it's not possible. It's a pipe dream. It's not going to happen. And eventually, in 2010, when my retirement from my teaching career was looming on the horizon, my husband and I had a conversation and we talked about what happens when you retire. And I said, I always thought that people should get to do what they want to do when they retire. And so we agreed that in 2014, which was the first year I could retire without a penalty to my pension, I would retire. And that is exactly what, in 2014, in June, I retired from my teaching career. And in September of the same year, I started my studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary in the rabbinical school. I was 6, and my birthday is in September. So that the month I started at JTS, I turned 60. It is a 5-year program. I commuted from home. I had a 2.5-hour 5-hour round trip daily commute from my home to Manhattan, on top of a long day of studies. But I loved the studying. I just loved the studying. It wasn't always easy. It was a very arduous, emotional 5 years. I had to do a semester in Israel. They allowed me to go only for a semester instead of a full year. And 5 years I did this. And in 2019, May of 2019, I was ordained as a rabbi at the age of 65. And at that point in my life, I was not looking for a full-time career like the rest of my classmates were. I just wanted something part-time. Part-time positions are few and far between. And little did I know that within the year, there would be a worldwide pandemic. And so in March of 2020, when the world shut down, the current rabbi of the congregation I belong to reached out to me and said, what can you do to help sustain our congregation during this time that we're going to be at home? So having always been a lover of text, I started, people had just started Daf Yomi a few months before. I started Parshat HaShavui, a Parsha a week. Every day I wrote Torah commentary on one aliyah of that week's Parsha. Seven aliyot, 7 days in the week. Every day I wrote something, and these got emailed out to the congregation. And I continued that. And eventually, by November, we were meeting in person. We were back in the synagogue again. But I said, you know what? I've seen this so far. I have to see this through to the end. So from March of 2020 through March of 2021, I wrote a daily Torah commentary every day on one aliyah of that week's Parsha. 378 entries, because there are 55 Parshas in the Torah, I wrote. And I got to the end and I said to myself, I have the makings of a book here. And so I am very happy and proud to tell you that after many revisions and many sessions of editing, as of today, my book has been published. It is available on Amazon. It is a commentary on the entire Torah, but it's not only a commentary on the Torah. It is because I related it to what was going on in the world at that time. So COVID, the social and political unrest in the United States, which we had plenty of during that year, it's all in there. So it's a unique approach to Torah commentary. It's written almost like diary style. Every day is dated and titled. And I hope that, and I think that many of the lessons that we learned during that year are still relevant today. So let me just finish up by really quickly, I'll show you a couple of pictures that go with this. And then I know I've spoken for a long time. If anybody wants to ask questions, well, I'll allow time for that. So this is the going back. This is an article which was written by the religion editor of Newsday, the Long Island newspaper, when the whole group started to break up. This over here, this is Jack.
It's not sharing, Rabbi.
It's not. Oh, okay. All right, hold on. Let me try that again. Oh, now you can see it?
There you go. Yes.
Okay, there we go. All right. So this is the article from the paper. This is Jack over here. That's an actual picture of him. This is someone's artistic rendering of him. This is a picture of the church that I grew up in, which ultimately we took over and kicked out the Christians. This is the bulletin from Stony Brook University from 1982. You can see the date there. Here's a picture. The photographer happened to come into the class one night when I was in that Holocaust class, sitting there with my son tucked under my arm, and the photographer couldn't resist. He took a picture and it ended up in the bulletin. So there we are. My son was going to college at a very tender age. So, and here, this is going back to that article which I showed you the pictures from in the beginning. It talks about, it says at the North Shore Jewish Center in Port Jefferson, 8 Christians so affected by the Judaism they had learned despite their disenchantment with its teacher are taking classes in preparation for formal conversion to Judaism. That's us. And there were a few other people with us, obviously. We are not named because the rabbi that we were working with was very protective of us, knowing we had gone through a lot, and said to the reporter from Newsday, you can come, but you cannot speak to them. I will act as the intermediary. And he would not give them our names. We didn't want to give him our names. This is a picture from my adult bat mitzvah in 1984. I carry the Torah. It's my husband there with me. This is a picture from the very, very, very first brochure from the Jewish Theological Seminary, the first time I wrote to them. You can see the year, 1988, 89. It's the first time I wrote to them. Here's a few more. So I have one, 89, 2008, 2010. So it was not until 2014 that I actually applied. This is a picture during my senior year of rabbinical school. I had a part-time pulpit in Newburgh, New York. I shared the pulpit because I couldn't be there every week. It was too much as a senior. There was too much going on. I shared the pulpit. I went 2 weekends a month. And this other rabbi here went the other 2 weekends a month. His name is Rabbi Moshe Edelman. What is very interesting and very serendipitous about this is that he is the rabbi who did our conversion. I got to share a pulpit with him. This is the program from my ordination ceremony with the listing of the names of my 2 mentors. Aaron Benson is the current rabbi of the North Shore Jewish Center. This is a picture of my graduating class, and here I am right here. There were 13 rabbis and 2 cantors in our graduating class. These are my graduation photos. My husband laughed. He said, what are you, 16? You need a graduation picture? But they actually I got graduation pictures just like everybody else. This is from the ordination ceremony. This is Rabbi Benson, who had put my talit on me and giving me a very personal blessing. And this is Rabbi Edelman, the rabbi who did my conversion, actually with the laying on of hands, putting his hands on me. These are 2 promo pictures from my book, just taken recently. And this is my book. So if you are interested, I'm not taking an honorarium for this evening. So I would ask if any of you are really interested, if you consider purchasing my book, you can purchase it on Amazon. Just type in my name or type in the name of the book. Hindsight is 2020. It is 632 pages. I'm very, very, very excited. So yeah, that is the end of my presentation. And here is the actual book. I received my copy this afternoon, and I'm really, really, really excited about it. So that's it.
Mazel tov.
Thank you.
Any questions? You want to use the reactions hand up, or just wave at me? I'll check both screens. Lillian, unmute yourself.
Hi. One question is, you said that when you started to go to the Hebrew classes that were not from your cult, there were things that you had to be re-explained, that you didn't use that word, but things that you had to learn differently about Judaism. And I was wondering if you could tell any of that. And the other thing is, I did order your book at convention, so I'm wondering when it's going to be mailed to me.
You should get it soon, because the publishing company processed all those orders for me, so you should be receiving it soon. And so the next time that there is a BQLI event, bring it with you and I will sign it for you, Lillian.
Thank you.
Yeah, so some examples of some of the things that we had to unlearn, because whatever Jewish things were going on, keep in mind, because this guy wasn't really Jewish, he was like learning from reading books and stuff like that. And some of the things he taught us were not quite accurate. The biggest example was when he taught us about keeping a kosher home. He taught us that chicken was parv. So, I used to make chicken parmesan. It was great, So that was probably the biggest misconception. There were others. And some of the things, you might say, like, there were so many people in this group who were born Jews. How could he pull this over on those people, right? So most of the Jews who were involved in our group didn't come from a particularly religious or educated Jewishly background. So, they might not have had enough wherewithal to say, that doesn't jive with what I've been taught. But you also need to remember that in a cult atmosphere, if you have doubts, I had plenty, believe me, I had plenty. You push them to the back of your mind because you say to yourself, there's something wrong with me if I can't believe like everybody else. And you also don't want to admit if you have doubts, because that almost makes you like a traitor. And you would have to be one of those people that would have to get up in front of other people and tell everyone that you would do. So, so yeah, I had a lot of doubts, but I kind of ignored them. Yeah.
Wanted to ask, how did he get away with it? I mean, it was part Jesus and part Jewish, and like, didn't people question, like, are we Jesus or are we Jewish?
Actually, that was exactly the whole point. He had us in a position where there was no place else for us to go with the belief that we had, right? We couldn't go back to the church because we really didn't believe in Christianity anymore. But we also couldn't go to the synagogue because we weren't practicing true Judaism. And so he had us believing that we were a special group and we had a special mission. He told us then that someday there was going to be another Holocaust, and it was going to be right here in the United States of America, and our job was going to be to save Jews from the Holocaust. Now, until about 5 weeks ago, I would have told you that I never would have believed that that was even possible. Unfortunately, I think we all can believe that maybe it is possible. But I don't believe that a Hebrew Christian group is going to be our saviors. No.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said that you thought there has to be a future for the Jewish people and that your son was going to be part of it. So what is your son doing now?
He is, I have of my two children, I have to admit that my daughter is observant. My son is not really observant. However, he is still very much aware of his Jewish identity. When he was in high school, was very much involved in USY. He went on Nativ after high school, which is where he met the woman who would become his wife. They are unfortunately separated now, but between the two of they gave us two beautiful grandsons. And as I said, he is very, very much aware of the fact that he is a Jew, and that's not changing. So I wish he were more observant, but how much, my thing always was also with my kids, I would not say to them, you must be what I am, because I rejected what my parents taught me. So I can't really tell them you have to do what I do. So yeah, yes, he is Jewishly involved, but not observant.
Thank you.
Karen and then Gina.
I'm just wondering what your relationship is with your family, your non-Jewish family, and what they thought about, your conversion to Judaism.
Okay, so it was a little bit rocky in the beginning. My mother was very, very, very involved in her church, as I said. She was a very faithful Christian. She was involved in her church as much as I have been involved in the synagogue. So for her, someone who is a real believing Christian, it was difficult to accept that her daughter would it's one thing for somebody who never believed in Jesus, but her daughter who had believed in Jesus and now rejected that, it was difficult for her. And I understood that it was difficult for her. So it was a little bit rocky in the beginning, but I have to say, over the course of time, ultimately my siblings all came around to accept, and not only to accept, but really be supportive of our decision. My family, my father unfortunately passed away 6 months after our conversion. That was a very difficult time for me. But my siblings and my mother came to my daughter's bat mitzvah, came to my son's bar mitzvah. And the day that I was ordained, 3 of my 4 siblings were in the audience at JTS.
Nice.
My one brother was not able to make it, but so they are very, very supportive of me, to this, is supportive and proud. I think my 2 sisters are probably 2 of my biggest cheerleaders. They're telling everyone to buy my book.
That's nice.
Okay,
Yes.
Tina, and then Dorothy.
I have one question. The priest, I guess, that ran what you call your cult, was he ever charged or anything done with him?
Unfortunately, no. I mean, there were people who looked into, what if anything could have been done legally. Some people thought maybe like a class action suit to try and get back some of the money that we had given, but lawyers advised that it would be very hard to prove that, you didn't give it voluntarily. So, I mean, ultimately, I think the only thing that he could have been actually charged with at that time was the abuse of the boys. And even towards the end, it was not he, but his assistant who was abusing the young kids. And truthfully, the parents of the boys who had been the victims were, they did not want to subject their sons to having to testify in court to this. So none of the parents wanted to do that. And so unfortunately, no, nothing was ever done. Ultimately, I mean, he's gone now. He did pass away a number of years ago. The group still continues though now. They have all moved to Maine, and they do continue with a different leader.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dorothy, last question.
I had was, why did this cult leader choose Judaism?
Your guess is as good as mine. I don't know. I don't know if anybody knows why he chose Judaism, or why he even did this in the first place. Some people have Messiah complexes, and I don't know. I don't know. But he did. And I mean, I guess it was for what he was trying to do. And I don't even know if this is what he set out to do in the first place, but he was able to try and mix the 2 religions together, because after all, Christianity grew out of Judaism.
Right.
All the original Christians were Jews.
Mhm.
And the disagreement between the church and the Jews was whether or not they were going to continue Jewish observance. So if he was going to mix it with anything, I guess Judaism makes the most sense. I mean, I don't know exactly why he did this. And some people have said to me, do I think I ever would have come to Judaism had I not been involved in this group?
Right. Mhm.
And my answer is I don't know. I can't tell you for sure. But I think that had I not found my way to Judaism this way, I would have found it some other way. I spoke last night about the Pintaliyid. Those of us who convert to Judaism, there's a spark from birth that looks to find its way home and find some way back to Judaism. So if it didn't happen here, it would have happened some other way.
Right. Okay.
Uh,
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
must say that Rabbi Cella taught me my trup in a trup class, so I was able to have my little bat mitzvah at home because I didn't get to convention. And also, if you notice, she's got green hair, green nails, and usually wears green. But she is the most wonderful teacher. I'm just amazed at what you learned all these years and has retained, because when you teach, she really teaches the most wonderful classes. So I'm very proud of her.
I'll second that. And
Yeah.
Ruth?
I would thank you. Anyway, I'm supposed to thank you. You taught me also Trop, and my bat mitzvah was better because of you. Anyways, but we're really happy that you told us your story, and we're really happy that you became Jewish, and you have a world of knowledge that every time you talk and teach us, like, is so unbelievable, because like I can't believe that you can remember all this stuff that you know. But anyways, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. It should be coming in the next couple weeks, I guess, if you're talking about it. Anyways,
Yes.
and thank you, and I'll see you on Macomb.
Okay. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody,
you.
for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Toda rabba.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You are an amazing, amazing person.
One
Thank
in a
you.
million. You're one in a million.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Take
Thank you
care,
so
everyone.
much.
Bye. Thank you.
No, no.